Welcome to today's episode of Backstage with Randy Phillips. I am Randy Phillips, and I'll be your host. And this is my very first episode. And I am so thrilled to be joined by the creator and director of The Chosen. His name, Dallas Jenkins. But before we dive in, I want to ask you, if you haven't already, subscribe and give us a 5-star rating of the show or your best review. Today, as we dive into Backstage of The Chosen, we'll be discussing several questions like, how did The Chosen come to be? What was the hardest and highlight moments on the set? How Dallas has protected his faith and marriage among hectic schedules. I'm so thankful you're here for this conversation. Dallas is a widely respected director, and he can teach us all how to serve the Lord with excellence and creativity wherever we find ourselves. I can't wait for you to hear more from him. Let's go. Well, thank you so much for joining us on Backstage with Randy Phillips. I am Randy Phillips, and I have the distinct honor of having Dallas Jenkins. Dallas, welcome.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Randy. It's great to be with you. And what a perfect name for the podcast. I don't know how you guys came up with that.
Backstage, yeah. We tell things on this podcast we probably shouldn't.
Yeah.
But we just kind of pull back the curtain and
naming it after you was perfect too. It was just such a perfect, name from beginning to end.
That wasn't very good, but thank you. Thank you for The Chosen. My daughter said, have you watched this? I said, no, I don't want to watch any more cheesy Jesus things. And I watched episode 1, my wife, and I couldn't believe it. So good. So we binge watched the rest of it. Your dad is Jerry Jenkins from Left Behind series.
Yeah.
Is acting, is directing, is producing just was in you?
I think the storytelling side, for sure. My dad's a storyteller, whether it's through the literally almost 200 books that he's written or in our home, with us as kids, whenever there were guests. I remember when you're a little kid, you're going to bed and the adults are downstairs.
Yeah.
And you hear the laughter come every now and then, and it was always my dad doing it. So I think the storytelling for sure was in me. And I originally wanted to be a sports broadcaster. That was my passion, was sports. And then my dad started introducing me to great movies when I was in high school. Okay. Movies like The Godfather, movies like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And I just thought, boy, whatever this is, I want to do it because the kind of emotional reaction that I get from watching great movies like this, I want to do for other people. But when you could do it from a faith perspective, if you could actually tell stories driven by your faith, if you could actually have that kind of impact, you could really change the world. And I found that when I watched faith-based stories or Bible projects, I didn't have the same reaction that I did when I watched the regular stuff. Right. It just seemed to be formal, stiff, boring at times, and that was kind of my motivation early on was, maybe we could do something different.
Boy, did you ever. Thank you. The Chosen, how did the genius of that, the germ, the idea, where did it come to you? Or was there a particular service you were in or just thinking? Or
Yeah, I would say I heard a sermon about 7 or 8 years ago. Someone was preaching about the crucifixion from the perspective of the thieves.
Oh, yeah.
And it was really exploring the thieves on the cross. And you do this all the time. You open the Word, you preach from that scripture, but you give context.
Yes.
Because the scripture doesn't often give the context of what the setting was in which these stories took place. And as a pastor, your job is to give people context so that the scriptures can make more sense and come to life. And this pastor was doing that. And he was talking about the thieves on the cross and what would the motivation have been for one thief to go from mocking Jesus to 2 verses later praising Jesus, or at least wanting to be with him in paradise. And I thought, there's a short film there. So I made a short film for my church's Good Friday service. And I'm grateful, of course, that church had the means to do a short film like that. And your church is like that, where you guys see the value of arts and media as a possibility to illuminate the scriptures for people. And so I had the opportunity to do that short film. And it was from the perspective of the two thieves. So we told their backstory. We looked at historical context, cultural context, artistic imagination to kind of build the story so that when we got to that moment on the cross at the end, the conversion actually made sense. You know how when you watch Jesus movies, you see Jesus save someone's life, or restore their blindness, or they find themselves worshiping him, but you don't know anything about them beforehand, so that it's not that impactful because you're not connected to it.
Yes.
And so we started doing that more often every year for Good Friday, doing these vignettes and short films, little stories of Jesus's, oftentimes his death or resurrection, but we're finding those little moments in between. And it always just, people responded so powerfully to them.
Oh, that's great.
I remember the first time I told my first Jesus joke in a short film. People talk about The Chosen and the humor of it.
I love the humor.
You've responded to Jesus' sense of humor. Well, the first time I tried it, you're not sure how people are going to respond. So I had Jesus sitting around the campfire with his disciples, and Andrew, the disciple, is arm wrestling Thaddeus, and he loses. And it's a big shock to everyone because Andrew has never lost an arm wrestling match. And they're all saying, I can't believe Andrew lost. And Jesus says, even I didn't see that coming. And
I love that.
The congregation responded like you did. And I remember as soon as that laughter hit, it was this laughter of not just humor, but of relief.
I know.
Like they were like, thank you for portraying the Jesus that I know. You don't see this often, but I know Jesus had to be funny and charismatic because so many people wanted to be around him.
I know.
And he told such great stories. And so that was the impetus for, ultimately I did another short film about the birth of Christ. And that's when I was binge watching these other shows that I love so much. In fact, I'm in Texas. Friday Night Lights was one of the shows that really inspired The Chosen a lot. The authenticity of it, the humanity of it. And I thought, boy, if you could capture that, but in the lives of the disciples and even the enemies of Jesus and Jesus himself, boy, that could be powerful, because then you could go from episode to episode, season to season. There's never been a multi-season show before about Jesus. It's always been movies and miniseries. And the thing you love about multi-season shows is the characters. You can really dig into the stories. So I know that's a long answer to your question, but I think that's
well done.
That's the origin story.
Thank you so much. You've got, at current, while we're talking, you have 3 seasons. Is that right?
2 seasons have been released. I'm writing literally this weekend as I'm talking to you. I'm finishing up the writing of the 3rd.
It's hard when people look at the discography of my group, for example. They're like, what's your favorite song? And that's like, oh man, every song, I know what went into it. I know the struggle I was going through when I wrote it. I know. So it's just like, which is your favorite children? I don't know. I love them all.
I will tell you this though, real quick. The Phillips, Craig, and Dean rendition of I Am Crucified with Christ is my favorite rendition of that song ever.
Thank you.
I've listened to that on repeat over the years. It impacted me. So that's my favorite.
It seemed like you would be a little too young for that song. I wrote that in the 90s.
Yeah, I was in college in the 90s.
Okay.
So that song, I mean, that song and your performance of it, it's been performed so many times from so many different people, but the original is the best.
Thank you. So when people say what's your favorite song, it's a hard question. Do you have a favorite episode or a favorite moment?
Yeah. Well, there's my favorite scenes that come as a viewer. So the ending of episode 7 of season 1, the last 10 minutes, Jesus meets with Nicodemus, and then Jesus calls Matthew. And those moments back to back, very different. One is a religious leader. The other one is an outcast, hated by his people. The music is different. The impact of each scene is different, but yet they come together in a way that I think is as a viewer, my favorite. And I felt like God anointed those moments on the set and also in the final. When I watch it, I watch it and I go, I'm not that good. And I'm sure you've had songs, and maybe the song we just talked about is one of those where you listen to it and you go, that clearly was done in spite of me. All I did was listen in that case.
So true.
But episode 4 of season 1, it's a scene of the miracle of the fish when Jesus calls Peter, and in that moment, Simon's been up all night fishing and can't catch a thing, and he finally, Jesus says, "Well, try a little deeper, try on the other side of the boat," and of course, this miraculous.
I love that.
And it breaks Peter. He all he can do is fall to his knees and say, "Depart from me, I'm a sinful man." So that story is great in the Bible, and I believe we captured it well. But what sticks out to me about it is the fact that 4 days before we filmed that scene, we didn't have fish, we didn't have a boat, and we didn't have water. All essential elements to a scene about a miracle of fish. The lake had flooded in the Dallas area that week, and the boat, the Jesus boat we were building, as we called it, was still being built, and the paint was literally drying the morning that we filmed it, and it hadn't been on the sea before, so we didn't even know if it was going to work, and all the fish that we tried to get live fish, dead fish, whatever. All of the elements were failed, and so 4 days before, it was Thanksgiving when I was talking to our visual effects supervisors and saying, "We got nothing. So God's going to have to do something to make this work." And he brought us to the end of it. And my wife calls these Red Sea moments. And they've happened a dozen times on The Chosen, where God takes you to the edge of the Red Sea. The Egyptians are coming. Yep. And the Israelites have no options.
Nope.
The only way they're going to escape is if God does a miracle and if he parts the Red Sea. And so when you can get comfortable in that moment, that Red Sea moment, if you're actually okay with being there, knowing God will do something, it's a superpower.
Oh, man.
And so that was where we were at. That was the first of the many Red Sea moments.
I love that. When you go to a set or you're going to shoot, there's hundreds of people, right? You got makeup, you got catering, you got actors, it's a city. It's a little city.
Yep.
And you're sort of having to manage the whole chaos. Yeah. I know you probably got a great team, but it falls on you. Yeah. Have you ever had a moment of filming where at the end of the day, however long it took, you just said, "That was a disaster"?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say with The Chosen, at least, I've had many days where I've thought this is shaping up to be a disaster. But my job I consider to be the immune system for the film. I think that's what the director's job is to protect. The project has what it's supposed to be. Yeah. And in the case of The Chosen, I believe God has something to say. And my job is to protect that and to steward it and to keep any one department or any one person, including myself, from their ego or their desire to have their way, to keep that from interfering with the project, and to allow in the best of what they've got and keep out the worst. That's what the immune system for the film is. And I have to say, with The Chosen, I've had days at the end of it where I didn't know how it would look later. Yeah. It didn't go as how I thought it might. Yeah. But I have gotten to a place, Randy, genuinely, where I truly believe it's not my job to feed the 5,000. It's only to provide the loaves and fish.
That's good.
And if every day I'm providing my 5 loaves and 2 fish and God deems them worthy of acceptance, the transaction's over. Yep. And what he does with it is up to him. And that's the posture that I have on The Chosen. And so that I really desperately try to live that out daily. And so at the end of each day, I go, we did everything we needed to do. We prepared. It didn't go according to plan. It maybe took longer than we expected. Maybe we had to spend more money than we hoped. But there are other days where the opposite is true. So it ultimately is in God's hands. And so that's, for better or worse, the place The Chosen is in.
Well, it's fantastic. Have you ever had a moment where you look back? Sometimes social media, some of them will it was a time period piece movie, but somebody will have on a wristwatch.
Yeah, they'll point out.
Or what are those called? Just
continuity errors.
Or have you had one as you look back at The Chosen that probably nobody's caught? You thought there's a Coke can sitting right there. Have you had any of that?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I remember there was one time when there was a little boy playing a first century Jewish boy, and most of them were in poverty, and And the tag on his costume was just sticking right up out of it. And it had the label on it, which was for sure not from the first century.
Yeah, I don't think.
And so we had to have our visual effects team kind of get rid of that.
Oh, I see.
There was another shot that lasted for a little while, where one of the crew members is literally standing on his phone in the background, just while Jesus is actually walking. He's calling out to Matthew, and in the background there's this guy on his phone, and we didn't see it until it was already out there, and so then we had to go back and change it. And then one thing that's kind of on a serious note is, and this is the biggest thing we struggle with, is there's so many Jewish rituals and traditions and icons that you have to get right to be authentic, and they take it very seriously. And so there's just hundreds of them, whether it's something on the wardrobe, or in one case, all the writing that you see in the show we do in Hebrew, even though they speak in English. And we wrote the word Yeshua in Hebrew, but it was a more modern form of the word. We got that wrong. Our guy on set who was helping us with it got it wrong. And there's a modern spelling of Yeshua that has actually been used by enemies of Jesus to kind of take out the godness of his name. And it's a particular part of the word, of the drawing of the letter that makes this huge difference. And oh my goodness, we offended 98% of the Messianic Jewish world by removing the godness of Jesus. And we had voice notes sent to us with people in tears. Oh, we're like, okay, all right, we didn't do it on purpose. We had to go back in and again with our visual effects team and fill in on.
That's awesome.
So that was, we laugh about it now, but at the time, some people were pretty upset with us.
As a director, on the other side of the camera you're looking through, have you ever shot a moment where it moved you to tears?
Yeah, I mean, it happens often in the writing. I'll go to my wife and I'll say, I had this idea for how Jesus would talk to this person, or how this storyline would work out. We'll both get choked up talking about it because it's so clearly something that God gave me, that that feels like a truth that maybe I'd known but not really fully understood. And so that happens a lot on set. Again, it's I mentioned this in our service, it's so logistical, and it's hard to find those emotional moments because there's cameras and crew, but boy, I'll tell you, the actress who plays Mary Magdalene, her name is Liz.
My goodness.
She's a miracle. I mean, you've seen it many times, but those scenes, it's just hard to watch sometimes without being emotional. And there's a scene in season 2 where she has relapsed.
Yes.
She... just because Jesus redeems us doesn't mean that we as human beings aren't capable of struggle. And she relapses and kind of goes back to the things that bothered her, that she was addicted to originally. And now she's so ashamed.
Yeah.
She can't face Jesus. And because she even says, he fixed me once and I broke again.
Oh, man.
And I remember when she said that, I was wrecked, because... it's just such a beautiful delivery and a great line that I don't remember who wrote it, but it was a beautiful line. But then when she finally, Jesus' mother says, you need to go see him. And she goes and sees him, and she's in a tent with Mother Mary and with Jesus. And she's saying, I can't face you. I can't look at you. She even at one point, she says that you redeemed me and I threw it all away. And she goes, well, that wouldn't be much of a redemption if you could get rid of it in a day.
Oh,
and he just convinces her and says, look up. And she finally looks up at him and he says, I forgive you. And it's over. And she collapses into his arms, and you can't watch that scene without getting wrecked. And,
I cried.
And the reason it was so powerful is because I think so many people needed to see that even the followers of Jesus struggled. And I remember there were some people who were bothered by it. They said, no, Mary Magdalene wouldn't have done that. She'd been redeemed. And I'm thinking, I don't know, you're reading the same Bible that I have.
Yeah.
Simon Peter, who was a rock of the church up until Jesus died and after Jesus died. I mean, he and Paul were having arguments. I mean, they were still struggling with some of their vices. And that is the story of the Gospels, is that constant reminder every day that we need that his grace is sufficient, but it does require a death to self, and she needed to die to herself again. And I thought that watching that scene on set, I couldn't help but be moved.
I wept. Yeah. I did. As an artist, touring away from family, at critical moments, I didn't see my little girl take her first steps. My marriage got into trouble. Doing the Lord's work, doing what he called me to do, but the things that were so precious to me, I just faced this great dilemma of I couldn't be comfortable anywhere I was at. When I was on the road, I needed to be at home. When I was at home, I yearned for the road. Has in the making, in the passion, in the all-gripping of what you're doing, which is so marvelous, have you had moments to where you just missed some things, needed to be somewhere?
That's a great question. Never been asked that, and it's a great question, and it's true. I would say that my wife and I have covenanted from the beginning of this project, when it started to take off and it started to kind of take over in many ways. We just really resolved to not let it take over our marriage. And I think it still threatens to at times. And there are times when the enemy is just, we know when something good is close to happening with The Chosen, because we start getting really difficult with each other and short-tempered.
Yeah.
And we just try not to ever let it go too far. You can't let resentment build. And I'm sure you experience this where in your marriage where you're starting to feel some resentment, but you're not saying anything because you're just trying to get through it. And or she's feeling some resentment, but she's not saying anything. And then finally one day you wake up and your marriage is broken or it's in trouble and you don't know how it happened because you missed the signs. So we've just really tried not to miss the signs. And I think Jesus has done that for us by putting red flags. And anytime that we never go too long without some sort of, I wouldn't say crisis, but some sort of glitch that just reminds us, all right, we got to get on our knees.
Right.
I will say this, though. I do struggle with The Chosen becoming the thing, becoming me. You've experienced this, I know. When people see you, you're Phillips of Phillips, Greg, and Dean, or now you're Pastor Randy. It's hard for you to find your own identity when everyone else is seeing you as the performer or as the pastor. And people now see me as The Chosen, the guy behind The Chosen.
Yes.
So it's on my mind all the time, and I got to get to a point where I can't let The Chosen become an idol.
Yes.
And God will take it away from me if I let it
That's
get in front of, in between me and him. And so when I'm worshiping, sometimes my thoughts are drifting to a scene I'm trying to write, and I'm like, no, I cannot ever let The Chosen, even though it's about Jesus.
Yes.
I can't let it get between me and God. And Phil Vischer wrote an extraordinary book. He's the creator of VeggieTales, wrote an extraordinary book called Me, Myself, and Bob that I encourage every artist or leader of any kind or pastor to read, because it talks about how God took VeggieTales away from him.
Oh, wow.
Because Phil had let VeggieTales get in the way. And so that book has been a guide for me. So I believe that, and seeing my dad go through it with Left Behind, I feel like God has blessed me by giving me those examples and those books to hopefully protect me from it.
Oh, man. Thank you for sharing that. I want to just congratulate you on The Chosen. It's changed my life. It's changed so many other people's life. It's helped me to love Jesus more.
That's the point.
I want to thank you for being on this episode of Backstage, and I'm just cheering you on, brother. Crowdfunding, my wife and I are personally invested. Our churches are going to be invested. And I just want to encourage everybody listening, watching today, go do your part to invest in the lives of souls so that people see Jesus in an authentic way. Yeah, the show is free, which is what I also want to tell people. If you haven't seen the show and you can't pay it forward, that's what we call it, because the show is totally free. It's optional payment. If you can't do that, or please don't. The reason that people pay it forward is so that you can watch it free. But if you can, and if God puts it on your heart to do so, it is an opportunity to be part of what God is doing. And it seems like God is changing lives around the world. And it's been fun for me to be a part of. And I think it's been truly fun for those who have paid it forward, like yourself. I think for you, I'm guessing, we haven't talked about it, but I'm guessing that when you did it, it felt like I'm participating in this. Yes.
It's not an obligation. It's an opportunity. It was a joy. Yeah. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you, brother. Dallas Jenkins, that was incredible.
I asked him that question. I wasn't sure he'd answer it, but he did, and he answered it well. To find out more information on The Chosen or to support the show financially, go to watch.angelstudios.com. That's watch.angelstudios.com. Hey, thanks for tuning in today. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to this show. And when you rate and subscribe, it helps us get the message to even more people. If you have a question you'd love to hear answered on this podcast, email me, podcast@life.family. That's podcast@life.family. I'd love to hear from you. I'll see you next time.